Welcome to the Buy Box Experts podcast. We bring to light the unique opportunities brands face in today's e-commerce world.
Hi, I'm James Thompson, one of the hosts of the Buy Box Experts podcast. I'm a partner with Buy Box Experts and formerly the business head of the Selling on Amazon team at Amazon. I'm also co-author of the Controlling Your Brand in the Age of Amazon book and the co-founder of Prosper Show, one of the largest continuing education conferences for Amazon sellers in North America. Today's episode is brought to you by Buy Box Experts. Buy Box Experts takes ambitious brands and makes them unbeatable. When you hire Buy Box Experts, you receive the strategy optimization and marketing performance to succeed on Amazon. Buy Box Experts combines executive-level advisory services with expert performance management and execution of your Amazon channel strategy. Go to buyboxexperts.com to learn more. Today, we are joined by Gene Zekel, a partner with Taft, Stettinius, and Hollister law firm. Gene focuses on marketing law, including antitrust, pricing and distribution, and brand protection. Since 1989, Gene has helped design, implement, and enforce more than 470 successful policies addressing minimum resale price, minimum advertised price, and their variants in diverse industries for both consumer and industrial products. Gene is co-author of the seminal 2003 antitrust article, Establishing and Maintaining an Effective Resale Price Policy, a Colgate How-To, as well as the 2020 Harvard Business Review article, Pricing Policies That Protect Your Brand, How to Prevent Unauthorized Discounting. So Gene, thank you for joining us today on today's Buy Box Experts podcast.
Thank you, James. It's a pleasure to be with you.
I'd like to start today's discussion by getting your thoughts on what you've seen brands do to evolve the way they manage themselves in online channels over the past 20 plus years.
Well, first, I think online selling in general caught a number of people by surprise in terms of its rapid growth and its implications. In the beginning, I think people were feeling their way around and they thought it was the greatest thing in the world. And they've learned that just like anything else, there's some downsides associated with it. I think on the consumer side, things have moved much more smoothly and are more developed. Mm-hmm. On the industrial side, there are plenty of B2B sellers who are waking up to find out that they've suddenly got a problem. So we're seeing a lot of things going on, a continual evolution, continuing to learn what the implications are and how to cope with them and try to stay on the curve. I think about it, as you mentioned, I've done a lot of pricing policies, and some people ask me, well, what's the average life of a pricing policy? And we've done so many of them that now we've got some history, and we're finding most of our policies get updated either on roughly a 5-year cycle, which means they last for 5 years before they're updated for developments, and we just did one that was 12 years old that updated it. And I guess that's because we try to focus on getting it right out of the box and providing plenty of language that contemplates flexibility. I'm not so sure that's quite answered your question, but again, we've seen a lot of developments, a lot of people trying to cope with this. I think the realization that, and I've heard you say this, Amazon is not necessarily your friend. And you have to understand what you're getting into. It can be very helpful, can be a very good place to be, but at the end of the day, be careful.
Let me go back to you coming out of law school. You started your professional career as a brand manager at Quaker Oats. I'm curious if you got to see firsthand any of the challenges of pricing discrepancies across channels.
Yes and no. First, when I came out of law school, I actually practiced as a marketing lawyer at a big firm, and then moved over to be an in-house lawyer at Quaker Oats. And then from there, I became a brand manager and then went back to the law. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that we did see, and this was in the early days, where Quaker historically had sold in grocery stores, and there was a new channel that cropped up, mass merchandisers.
Yes.
And mass merchandisers originally sold only what's known as dry grocery, meaning things like packages of dry dog food or canned dog food or other kinds of products. They were not into refrigerated products or frozen products yet. And that was an issue at the outset, which was, okay, how do we deal with these folks? And the argument that was made on, and we still hear this from time to time from a legal point of view, is, oh, it's a different class of trade. And it turns out that that is not a justification at all for charging different prices under the Robinson-Patman Act. What the standard is who competes against whom, because the law requires you to treat competing customers alike, unless you have a good reason to differentiate. So we had to dig into it, and we had to say, okay, first, you can't say that if I buy my bag of dog food at Target, I won't buy it at, or it doesn't compete with Safeway for that same sale on that same bag of dog food. So they do compete against each other. And then secondly, though, there are differences in doing business. The grocery stores back then typically advertised once a week on Best Food Day in the newspapers, where the mass merchandisers ran rotos once a week with a much longer lead time. Well, obviously, you had to take some of those things into account and deal with them in a different way and find a good way to justify the differences. There were also different payment terms, all of which could be incorporated and dealt with appropriately. But you couldn't just blanketly say, oh, different class of trade, therefore we can treat them differently. No, you had to find some justification for treating them differently, which wasn't so hard once you dig down.
When did you first start to see the pain that brands were experiencing when dealing with retailers that were playing pricing games with them?
Well, there's always been a tension, I think, between retailers and manufacturers, and it seems to ebb and flow depending on economic conditions. It seems like when times get tough, that retailers and manufacturers put their arms around each other and embrace each other. And when times are pretty good, particularly if some manufacturers are getting aggressive on prices, then it seems to be more of an adversarial relationship. So I think there's always been some tension in that regard. You know, as I think about it, drawing from a different area, namely industrial distribution, one of my consulting clients says you have to understand that resellers and manufacturers come from two different places. Manufacturers want to run their factories 24/7, churn out lots of product and sell it, where resellers are interested in turns. And it's a different ballgame altogether. And so that, I mean, there's always been some kind of tension, at least to a certain extent. I think one of the things that's really changed is, particularly as we've gone to online selling, prices are more transparent. And that's really caused all kinds of issues. It's very good in some respects, also very bad in some respects. But for a long time, I think maybe since the inception of retailers and manufacturers, there's always been some tension over how the size of the pie and how it's cut. And I think with transparency in pricing and other kinds of pressures, it's just become all the more immediate, and it's harder to play games. I mean, another thing that's changed a great deal, and, you know, going back to my Quaker days, back in the last century, but particularly like the 80s, there were no national sellers of grocery products. You had very large regional players like Kroger, but there were no national sellers, which allowed a manufacturer to set up separate trading areas with different pricing for each. And I'm talking about buy prices on the part of the grocers,
yes.
And also different promotions. And then, of course, what happened was Walmart, Target are now national sellers of grocery products, and all that's fallen down because they compete against everybody. And, of course, Amazon is also a national seller of grocery products and other online sellers. So that whole concept has gone away, and it gets the transparency that has really made all the difference.
So let's talk about Amazon for a bit here. Obviously, I have a vested interest in Amazon. We work with brands that are trying to figure out the best way to get their products positioned on Amazon. When I look at brands first becoming exposed to the Amazon channel, you know, the first thing I think a brand needs to learn is there's two types of third-party sellers. There are those that are authorized by the brand to sell on the channel, and then there's everybody else. And there's a whole world of unauthorized seller activity out there, huge, sophisticated unauthorized sellers who have figured out how to source product and how to make a living selling these products on Amazon without any oversight from the brand. You specialize in putting pricing policies together for brands. Much of the benefit of those pricing policies will certainly be around policing authorized sellers. Tell me what you think about the process of removing unauthorized sellers from the Amazon channel?
Well, pricing policies can be very powerful. They're not necessarily the only solution to price erosion. Or, of course, price erosion is anytime there's a disparity, usually in acquisition prices, you have channel conflict that creates price erosion. And certainly a very potent tool is a pricing policy, whether it be a minimum resale price or a minimum advertised price. But that's only half the puzzle. To your point, and you're exactly right, you have the world's greatest policy, and usually the people who want to follow it are the authorized because they really care about the brand and they have a brand investment and so on. The unauthorized aren't supposed to have the product anyway, so threatening to cut them off for policy violations, pricing policy violations, some of them are just going to shrug and say, so what? I mean, I'm not supposed to have it anyway. So the other side of things is not only a pricing policy, but is controlling distribution. That's key, absolutely key. And there are a variety of different ways to do that. But the least expensive and probably the most effective, and I'm not saying it's easy, is simply to be very careful about who gets your products. Those brands that sell to anybody with a pulse, no wonder they have problems with everybody, unauthorized sellers, and the inability to enforce their pricing policies, and other policies too, for that matter. So carefully controlling who gets the products, and for those people that have historically sold durables, consumer durables, like electronics and on the automotive aftermarket and things like that, they have a deeper history of being selective in terms of who gets their products, where the consumer packaged goods companies, which are the subject of much price erosion right now online, and is a red hot area for development, they're used to intensive distribution. They want their products every place. They want to sell everybody. Not so much of a problem, or at least somewhat of a lesser problem when it's just bricks and mortar, but online that creates all kinds of problems. And it is, I mean, perhaps it's easier said than done, but the whole idea of controlling as much as possible who gets your products and what they do with it makes all the difference in the world. I mean, you're never going to control 100%, but you really do need both sides of things. You need if you have price erosion, a pricing policy that's good and you're prepared to enforce it and so on, but also you've got to control distribution. And so that's really the key.
In a number of brands that we've worked with, the executives will put together some sort of a online policy or a pricing policy, and then they won't pay any attention to the types of incentive structure they have in place for the sales team or any type of meaningful enforcement of the policies that they are asking the sales teams to actually implement for themselves. And as a result, the sales team do what they do best, which is sell as much stuff as possible without any long-term concern about the brand, the brand being bastardized by people who shouldn't have the product. How have you been involved with brands who put the legal work into place, but don't necessarily implement internally what needs to be done, the hard choices around telling the director of sales that the game's got to change?
It's a really common problem, and oftentimes we'll work with the e-commerce folks. Other times we work with the salespeople or the marketing people. But at the end of the day, you need senior management coordination to say that this is the way it's going to be. Because to your point, people do what they're incentivized to do. And if you have a sales force that's largely incentivized on volume in terms of compensation, it's going to do just what you said. It's going to sell, 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 sell. And that may be absolutely the opposite of trying to carefully protect the brand. So you need somebody, instead of just siloing the function and say, well, this is just a e-commerce issue. No, it isn't. If it has implications in other areas within the company, and you really need everybody to climb on board. A few years ago, we did a minimum resale price policy for a company that sells sporting goods. And it's a pretty good-sized company, but we had dealt directly with the CEO, and there was some pushback from the sales force, because the last thing on earth the sales force wanted to do is cut somebody off for policy violations. And the CEO set up a call that I was on with the senior sales management, and he said, look, we need to do this pricing policy for the long-term preservation of our brand. And as a result, we're going to have to enforce it, and that means cutting some people off. But I'm telling you right now, I will adjust your numbers downwards so none of you gets hurt if we have to cut somebody off. Suddenly, the sales force embraced it. And
Yes.
it wasn't an issue. Now, we don't see that, or at least we're not directly involved like that very often. But you really do need kind of a macro view to understand what the implications are. And I mean, in a more subtle way, one of the things that we see all the time too, when we create these pricing policies, very common are 3 strikes and you're out. Often there's pressure from the sales force to make it 4 strikes or 5 strikes or 6 strikes. Because again, they don't want to be in a position where they actually cut somebody off in any meaningful way. And you have to fight that, because at some point you don't have a policy. If you give somebody bites at the apple.
Yes.
Or
Yes.
we've had some conversations recently, which I think we were successful in shooting down these concepts. But one was, well, we're going to penalize the first mover. So the one who takes the price down first. We're going to penalize the first mover much more harshly than the ones that are second or third or fourth or fifth. And my response to that was, and again, this is a Salesforce, I think it came from Salesforce, was first, how are you going to know who moved first? And secondly, you realize that you're necessarily going to be tolerating a lot of violations. And do you really have a policy at the end of the day? I mean, the way we write the policies, it doesn't matter whether you're the first mover or the third mover.
Yes.
If you break the policy, it's a violation. And either you kind of keep your finger in the dike or you don't. Another thing that we've seen is pressure to give retailers so many bites at the apple. So even in a 3-strike or 4-strike and you're out environment, instead of aggregating violations across all the SKUs that are covered, treat each SKU on a standalone basis. So that would mean in order to lose access to a particular SKU, you'd have to have 3 or 4 violations on that SKU. Well, if you have 100 SKUs and you let's assume a 3-strike and you're out, that would mean, if I do my math correctly, more than 200 violations before anybody gets cut off.
That's totally ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly. And at the end of the day, either you have a policy or you don't. So you have to fight back on those things. And I'm not, by any means, I'm not criticizing folks like the sales force. Again, if you're incentivized to do certain things, that's the way you're going to operate. But these kinds of programs, the pricing policies and the distribution control is really a high-level issue that goes to protecting the brand ultimately. And it's a long-term play, which is also difficult for a lot of companies to swallow, particularly public companies that are used to short-term, relatively short-term focus. And that is, you do these policies to preserve your brand so that you spend a lot of time, money, and energy differentiating yourself, building up brand equity and so on. You want to preserve that. You want to even enhance it over a period of time. And you also do it to preserve a diversity of channel members. If it's important for your brand, for example, to be distributed not only in bricks and mortar, but also online. And even online, you don't want 1 or 2 online sellers. You want a dozen, or you want 15 or 20, and so on. You want to preserve those people. You've got to create an environment that is attractive for them. And some of that may mean, in the short run, you've got to get rid of some people who shouldn't be selling your product. You may have to do some other things that are unpopular. You may have some attractive retailers who want to test you to see if you really mean it.
Yes.
And you have to show them that you really mean it. And those of our clients who are serious about this, and by serious I mean they have a real commitment and they're willing to break a few eggs, it's paid incredible dividends. We one client, not in the consumer area, but in the B2B area, making automotive aftermarket parts, that actually has an audit function. And they will periodically go out and audit distributors and dealers to see if they're upholding their policy. They don't do it every day. They do it a couple of times a year. They'll pick somebody at random, or maybe they'll pick a troublemaker, and they'll hire a accounting firm and go in for a half a day and pull invoices at random to see if they're upholding the policy. And this is apart from the normal online monitoring and so on. And while it wasn't very popular at the beginning, now people really understand. They have a policy, they mean it, and they get a lot of applause. And they're very popular because they stand behind and they take care of the people who uphold the policy.
You talked about pricing transparency being at an all-time high now that we've got online channels. At Buybox Experts, we consistently are surprised by how many brands aren't working to control their pricing across channels, meaning they're doing promotions in one channel, whereas they're not doing it in another channel. Amazon has the tools to very quickly identify if Walmart.com is cheaper or if Target.com is cheaper. I'm curious on your thoughts as brands focus their efforts on brick and mortar channels potentially more than online, or they focus more on one particular channel than another, not understanding how pricing in one place is going to most likely lead to pricing changes to align in other channels. How have you seen brands grow up and learn that, as you say, this transparency not only makes everything visible, but you have retailers that are very happy to follow quickly to match those prices that other channels have lowered?
Well, there's a lot of dynamics, a lot of things going on here, and there are a number of different ways to address them. I think your point is well taken, though, that nobody is really cocooned because things are so transparent. And by the same token, controlling expectations can sometimes be helpful. And what I mean by that is, I think probably all of our clients who've had issues with Amazon, and just about all of them have, as you know, a common refrain when Amazon is caught violating a pricing policy is, oh, we use an algorithm and we monitor prices in the market,
Yep.
and we find a lower price, we lower it. Well, the correct response is, sorry, Amazon, particularly when Amazon says, by the way, so don't enforce the policy against me. Get everybody else's price up and we'll get ours up. Well, the correct response is, hey, Amazon, where's it written that we enforce our policy last against you? You're too big, you're too visible, we take our violators as we find them, this is a violation. There's no out for price matching. Now, that's the correct response and probably the strongest one. The fallback is to engage in a dialogue with Amazon and say, look, we know you're in a competitive world, Amazon, and we enforce our policy uniformly, but you tell us, who are the half dozen or so, if there are that many, key competitors, and we will work extra hard in terms of enforcing our policy against them. But by the way, Amazon, you don't need to meet the price of somebody selling onesies, twosies on eBay.
Yes.
They don't compete against you.
Yes.
So, you may throw, with your algorithm, you may throw a very wide net, but somebody selling onesies, twosies on eBay is really no threat. Why are you focusing on that? As one of our clients in the pet products area said, we did a map policy for it. First, the client said, we had written off the online channel because we thought that it was just unmanageable. And to our great surprise, the map policy has been very, very successful. But the second thing we learned is that we don't need to control everybody's price in the market. There are a half dozen players that are significant.
Yes.
And if we get them on board, everybody else pretty much follows. Yeah, there are a few outliers here and there, but moreover, those half dozen understand that as long as their major competitors are playing ball, they don't worry about the outliers.
So as brands get their pricing policies in place, talk to me about some of the best practices you've seen with companies rolling out the enforcement externally to their distribution and their retailers. Are there clever nuances you've seen brands use that have really helped them do enforcement, and quite frankly, other companies should follow their leads?
Well, all the policies we draft have a lot of flexibility in them, and we contemplate not only perhaps a company doing some self-monitoring, but also using outside services to do that. And then we add another nuance that some people, at least some lawyers, believe you can't do, but as far as we're concerned, there's no issue. And that is what one of our clients calls the snitch network. And that is we write our policies to allow our clients to take complaints from the field. So one retailer can call up and complain about another retailer's pricing. And the law says as long as there's no agreement with the complainer on the actual resale price charged, you're okay. So we set it up in such a way that we accept the complaint and we say, thank you very much. We'll look into it, and if warranted, we'll take action. And if we do take action, by the way, or don't, we never get back to the complainer because we keep things confidential. But that snitch network is pretty good at augmenting some of the other monitoring efforts. So that is an important component, kind of a fill-in, because think about it, all monitoring is essentially a sampling process. And as like any sampling process, you're not catching everything. You're going to miss some things. And so this will augment it up to a certain extent. That having been said, of course, there's always the possibility of some false negatives or false positives. Right. People calling up, oh, he's doing this, he's doing that. In fact, one of our clients told me that they investigated complaints that they received and found out that one dealer had photoshopped the screenshot of another dealer to make it look like they were in violation. So you get some kind of nonsense, but nonetheless, that helps. I think the other thing is when we draft policies, ours usually run maybe 5.5, 6 pages, and we get clients who say, well, wait a minute, why can't we do what GoPro does? GoPro's not a client, but GoPro, maybe it's changed recently, but had maybe a 1.5-page policy. Well, their policy is very vague. It doesn't really deal with realistic situations. Again, it's very broad. It's sort of like, we're going to decide what it means when it's in front of us. What we like to do is lay out situations that our client feels strongly about, either positively or negatively. So, for example, one of them would be that you might feel positively about is when you think about, and it doesn't matter whether it's a minimum resale price policy or MAP policy, you have to say, okay, what do we compare when we say the minimum price on this is X? What do we compare that against? Well, what we compare it against is something we call the net adjusted price, which is the price that's offered by the retailer, net of all discounts, allowances, rebates, you name it, either now or later. So one thing that our clients feel positively about, though, is that free shipping should not constitute a discount. That's almost universal. Why? Because it's so common on the internet. So we specifically accept out free shipping. Things that they may feel negatively about are bundling. All of our clients except one have strong feelings about bundling. It's a way to cheat. Yes. And bundling is, of course, combining more than one product into a package. And it might be products of the same manufacturer, or might be of different manufacturers. It doesn't matter, and offering a bundle price rather than an individual price. And most of our clients feel pretty strongly about that. And we either take two approaches. We ban all bundles, except for those that come from the manufacturer or are authorized by the manufacturer, or we use an arithmetic test that says we'll take the bundle price, we'll subtract the minimum price for our product. If the remainder is less than the fair market value of the other products that are included, even if they're not our manufacturer, and we determine what that fair market value is. But if the remainder is less than the fair market value, then it's a violation.
Doesn't make it very interesting to do bundles at that point. So yeah, you've accomplished what you want out of that.
No, but if we always have an out. We can still approve one if we want to. So and that this goes back to an earlier point. I mentioned we write our policies with flexibility, and we allow for a couple of broad exemptions. One would be, of course, a across-the-board relaxation. So sometimes called a MAP holiday, where a manufacturer may say during the month of May, the minimums on these 10 SKUs are reduced by 10%, but June 1st they go back up. And this is across the board, so it's not retailer specific. We have some clients who just say they'll take off their MAP or their resale price program completely for a certain period. And we usually recommend against that for fear of a free fall on prices. So we think it's better to announce a new minimum during that period. But anyway, there's across the board, but we also allow for one-offs. Now, one-offs are the idea where, let's say, a retailer comes to us and says, you know, we want to do a 50th anniversary sale for the store, and we'd like to include your products. Will you give us some special dispensation? Or we want special Black Friday pricing, or we want a show special at a particular show that we're going to be at. And we allow for all of those. And again, it's done unilaterally. There's no agreement, but it does open the door for price matching. So Amazon or somebody picks up a Black Friday price that we offer to a particular retailer, and now Amazon is doing the same thing. And so you have to be careful. It can be a slippery slope Or the other way, it's not so much necessarily price matching, but you go to the retailer saying, wait a minute, how come this guy can go lower?
Yes.
And you point to the language in the policy that says, see this?
Yep.
You come to us with a good concept. And
Yep.
if we think it has merit, we'll allow a one-off for you.
So let's say a company does get its pricing discrepancies removed, and they've done this through the right implementation and enforcement of policies. Talk to me, Gene, about some of the unexpected positive benefits that you've seen brands create by putting these types of policies in place.
Well, I think among other things, if you look at the brand as a platform, we've had situations where I can think of one very clearly, where a manufacturer wanted to introduce a new product under a particular brand and had a certain price point in mind. But because the price for that brand had been down too low, it needed to be raised. Mm-hmm. So we did a minimum resale price policy that facilitated that, getting it back up where it is. So that's another way of more directly answering your question would be, if you have a strong platform with at a good price, that helps you with respect to introducing new products under that, where you can maintain the price that you're looking for if you've already established one more or less in the ballpark for that brand. In other words, if you've got a prestige brand and it's marketed as one and you're getting a price for it that is consistent with that, you can introduce other products under it and price them as prestige products. So I think that's one of the upsides to doing this. I think another upside is, remember, as part of controlling distribution too, knowing who's selling where. And let me explain that a little bit. A lot of manufacturers don't know who's selling their products. Yes, they know who is selling online or who they sell directly to, but particularly those who buy through distributors, they have absolutely no visibility of them. We think it makes a lot of sense to know who's selling your products and where. And so in those cases where it makes sense, we like authorization programs that you can only get our products if you're authorized.
Yep.
And we require our distributors to only sell to authorized customers and not to sell anybody who's on our do not sell list. And I mean, this percolates into pricing policies themselves. For some years now, we've been putting in most of our pricing policies to say that it's a violation of our policy to sell online, period, except on those websites that we approve in advance and subject to our continuing approval, and under those business names we approve in advance. So in other words, we want to know when we're selling a particular retailer, they're selling on their own website, fine, no problem. They have to come to us and say, well, we want to sell on eBay, we want to sell on Amazon. And we might say, we've already got 21 sellers on Amazon, we don't need a 22nd one. Or, yeah, okay, fine, Amazon. But now we know where people are selling, and we know who it really is, and we know the various names that they're using. I mean, there's a variation on that theme, which we call the negative option, which is rather than get approval up front. And let's face it, there's some accounts that would just be grandfathered in. You're not going to require a PetSmart to apply or anything like that. But any event, there's the upfront approval, or the other alternative negative option is they can sell any place they want till we tell them they can't. Now, the problem with that is, well, it's less administratively intense up front. You're attacking the problem after it occurs, and so it's not preventative. And you've got to find them, you've got to figure out who they are, and then you have to tell them to stop.
At the end of the day, enforcement's going to be part of the game forever going forward for any brand that's serious about what its brand looks like and how it's priced. So, you know, as I talk to brands today that haven't really evolved the way they think about online marketplaces and the impact on the overall brand, it's amazing to think that they think they can write a check, get a policy, or get somebody to do some cleanup, and then it's one and done. We're all done. I can go back to doing what I was doing before because you cleaned up the problem.
No, you're exactly right. And it doesn't, we're still seeing some of this, but I can think of one example. We had a client in the audio area, and it had a MAP policy. This is before we got involved with it. And it was serious about it, but it enforced it about once a quarter. And so not continuously, but just, you know, periodically they put their head up, they'd find some violations, they would go after them, and so on. Well, after a holiday selling season, they got a letter from Guitar Center, one of their biggest accounts. And Guitar Center has been very aggressive about pricing policies. And Guitar Center said, hey, you have a MAP policy, but you let it get away from you during this holiday selling season. Enclosed is our invoice for lost margin.
Yes.
And it was many hundreds of thousands of dollars. And now to our client's credit, it didn't pay the invoice. But suppose Guitar Center instead would have debited a payment, and then we'd have to chase them to get the money back. But I mean, it gets pretty bad when you get to that level, and people get pretty impassioned about it. But you're right. You can't just say, hey, I wrote a policy. In fact, we not only write new policies, but we are often asked to revitalize existing ones, and usually they're the ones that we didn't write, somebody else did, or the company did them themselves. And you're exactly right. There's this phenomenon where under pressure, usually from various retail accounts, companies will, to save money, they'll go online, they'll find somebody's policy, they'll copy it and maybe make some edits or maybe cobble a few together and then introduce it. And they'll say, see, we have a policy. Right. And that buys them some goodwill for maybe a month until the retailers find out it's not being enforced.
Yep.
And or it doesn't work because it's just cobbled together. It doesn't necessarily suit that particular company and what it's willing to do. It causes more problems than it solves. But there is, I think, an ongoing issue, and that is particularly with smaller companies. They want to play, and needless to say, online gives them the ability probably to get greater distribution than they would otherwise, and that's a great thing, particularly for some very good products. But by the same token, there's a substantial cost associated with developing a policy, controlling distribution, and enforcing it. And for a lot of smaller companies, it's difficult for them, very difficult. And there's just no easy way to do it. If you're going to do it right. Mm-hmm. That having been said, we have plenty of clients that are small and medium-sized companies that take it very seriously, and they've been very successful. In fact, we've got 2 clients that told us that the policies that we help them design and implement save the company. And that's good news, but they had really the commitment to do it. And they are not huge companies, but they needed to do it, and it helped them a great deal. I'm reminded of something else that you don't see this very often, but we did a minimum resale price policy for a company that makes musical instruments. And most of its competitors had MAP policies. Well, this is a minimum resale price policy where we set the actual selling price as well as the advertised price. And this company actually ran ads in a trade journal, and I think the trade journal is called Music Merchant or something like that, for dealers of musical instruments that said MRP does not equal MAP. And then the copy, that was the headline, the copy said, unlike our competitors that have MAP policies, we have a minimum resale price policy. We protect you better. We're more comprehensive in our approach. And they actually used it as a recruitment tool to get better dealers.
Interesting to see how, if you get your act together, it's easier to get other companies and other retailers interested in carrying your brand. So that totally makes sense to me, Gene. I want to finish our discussion with a question around when you look at what you do and what you've been doing professionally, you're very much in the business of helping people to change the way they do what they're doing. And getting people to make changes is a difficult task in and of itself. I'm interested in advice you've received from your professional mentors, specifically around how do you get people to make changes?
It's tough. And, the situation I think that's altogether too common is people make changes when their backs are to the wall and they have no choice. And I think because most people are deadline motivated and they have many pressures on them too, that they react when they need to react. And there are many fewer companies, I think, that get out the crystal ball and they say, well, we need to do this because it's going to become more important later. So how do you get change to happen? Again, it starts at the top. There has to be somebody in a fairly senior position who says we need to do this, and somebody who takes the long view. One of the things we found fairly successful is particularly in a company that has divergent interests. So you've got marketing may have a different point of view than sales, than finance, than senior management, than legal. we've been successful in getting all those people in a room and doing a half-day workshop that we label as best practices. So we're not in there to tell them that they have to do things a particular way. We tell them what best practices are. And just getting everybody in a room and having them exchange ideas, and sometimes they're very heated discussions, friendly but heated, it allows people to talk about, let their perspective be known, understand where other people are coming from, and so on. And it's not uncommon at all that rather than, you're not going to have people coming out of there saying, hallelujah, I'm saved. But more importantly, there's usually a consensus in terms of direction. And then there's a smaller working group that takes the next step to try to implement things, or to implement things, to put things together, and so on and so forth. But that's a pretty good way to do it. Get people together so they discuss what's needed. One of my consulting clients in the industrial area talks about a situation where they're very upset because the distributors were not doing all the things that the manufacturer wanted them to do. And so this consultant got everybody from the manufacturer in a room who had anything to do with this distributor. So it was the warranty claims people, the marketing people, the sales people, the finance people, the training people, because it's a capital good, and a bunch of other things. And they went around the room, and several times they said, okay, well, now what do you expect the distributor to do? And the training people said, train their people, train their customers, and so on and so forth. So they made a list, and they kept going around the room, and they pulled together something like 150 different things that they expected them to do. So then the consultant looked at them and said, how many of you in this room would do this for 12 points? So their margin was only about 12%. How many of you would do it? And they all looked at each other. Well, of course we're not going to do it.
Yep.
But that was the reason that they were disappointed with the distributor. They were simply asking too much and paying too little. So it's the same kind of thing, I think, to get those ideas out front. And then the other thing, again, some of it may require a holistic position. We have to say, well, why do the sales force, why are they so resistant to this? Well, they're resistant to it because a big chunk of their compensation is volume, and this threatens the volume. Well, we need to do something about that. We're not suggesting change the compensation system completely. Maybe volume is still important, but add some other benefits that get them to get on board and do this. I think one other thing, and maybe this is a good way to close or get near closing, is sometimes companies expect the sales force not only to sell, but to be their police officers.
Yeah, that'll never happen.
It's the wrong role. It's the wrong role. And so in all the policies we do, we divorce the sales force from any involvement with them. To the point that, and we had the sales force of one particular client actually applauded this. We said, we gave them all what the client calls Miranda cards, where the sales force is told, look, anybody asks you or complains about the policy, you tell them, I'm sorry, I can't talk about it. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, call the policy administrator. So it completely took it out of the sales force hand. They could commiserate with the account and say, oh yeah, I hear you. That was a dumb move or whatever.
I love it. Great idea.
But they're not police officers. You don't want them going in there and saying, okay, you've got to follow this now or whatever. No. You completely divorce it. It also allows the sales force to play good cop and bad cop.
Gene, I want to thank you for joining us today. For those of you interested in learning more about Gene's organization, please visit taftlaw.com.
Thank you very much, James. A real pleasure. And, maybe you and I together will continue to fight the good fight.
Thanks, Gene.
Thanks for listening to the BuyBox Experts podcast. Be sure to click subscribe, check us out on the web, and we'll see you next time.